The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to today's session entitled Better Care for Complex Needs, Priorities for the Field. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. When you joined today's webinar, you selected to join either by phone call or computer audio. If for any reason you would like to change your selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in your control panel. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send your questions in at any time, and we will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce John Feather, CEO of Grantmakers in Aging and moderator for today's webinar. John?
Thank you, Kat. I'm delighted that so many of you have joined us today. We want to thank the 5 Funder Collaborative that consists of the Commonwealth Fund, the John A. Hartford Foundation, Peterson Center on Healthcare, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and the SCAN Foundation for their support of this work. We are also grateful for the support and co-sponsorship today with Grantmakers in Health. To improve the health outcomes and daily lives of individuals in the United States with the most complex care needs, these 5 foundations are working together to accelerate health system transformation. The playbook, developed by the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, represents one step towards this transformation. The playbook, which was launched in December 2016, explores the challenges facing adults with complex health and social needs and provides evidence-based or experience-informed ideas about how to address these challenges. In compiling this body of work, the IHI team has reviewed, curated, and created over 150 resources, including peer-reviewed journal articles, case studies, step-by-step guides, and practical guidance. Through this process, the team has identified priorities for the emerging field that funders may consider as they explore opportunities to improve care for people with complex health and social needs. We're very pleased that today we're joined by an expert team from the Institute for Health Improvement, and they include Dr. Kate Armante, the Chief Innovation and Education Officer, Catherine Mather, the Senior Project Manager, and Marion Burrell-Johnson, Innovation Director. We welcome you all. I want to remind everyone that we will be having questions and answers at the end. As we said before, you see a question panel. You just open that panel and on your control panel and type your questions in at any time, and I will be asking our panel later today. So, Kedar, we're going to begin with you. Tell us about the playbook, how it came to be, and what you hope that this will achieve.
Thank you, John, and thank you to Grantmakers in Aging for the opportunity to be with you today. We're just incredibly pleased, honored really to be part of this and to talk with all of you about the work that we've been doing here. And as John mentioned, this is supported by a fantastic group of foundations that have helped us to generate the playbook. My colleague Catherine Mather will go through some of the details in just a moment, but I just want to take a moment to pause and thank, as you have done, the John A. Hartford Foundation, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Peterson Center on Healthcare, the Commonwealth Fund, and the SCAN Foundation for entrusting the IHI, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, with the challenge and also the opportunity to create a playbook for the field of complex care that will help us to orient and take our work forward. I just want to pause at the outset here just to tell you a little bit about why IHI, when the 5 foundations came to us, why it was an easy yes for the IHI. The Institute has been around, for those of you that don't know it, has been around for 30 years now, or almost 30 years, working to improve health system designs to ensure safe and high quality care. Our mission is to improve health and healthcare around the world. And the focus has been for that 3 decades has been on bringing methods from industry, from manufacturing, from aviation, from nuclear power, around how to improve reliable and safe systems and how to bring that to healthcare. And as that work progressed over the years, we quickly realized that there were certain populations that needed fundamentally different approaches to care. And back in 2007, the IHI and some of its partners created what's now known as the triple aim for improving health of populations. The triple aim has three goals: improve the health of whole populations, improve the care experience for patients as they travel through our health systems, and lower the cost of care. Organizations and communities that have been pursuing the triple aim have partnered with IHI over the last decade to try to achieve this three-part goal. The idea was that if you pursue any one of those aims independently, that it may come at the expense of the other two, but if you pursue all three of them together, that you may in fact have an opportunity to achieve better health for whole populations. Over that decade, over 150 communities and health system partners have partnered with IHI to pursue the triple aim. And in fact, the latest iteration of that is something that we call the IHI Leadership Alliance, which is 45 current health systems that are actively pursuing the triple aim at this time. As we began that work and as we've continued that work over the last decade, very quickly organizations turned to the issue of complexity. How do we address complex needs in our patient populations and in our communities? Some people call these the high need, high cost patients. Other people call them the complex patients. Whatever you might call them, these are the patients that make up about 50% of the total healthcare expenditure in the United States at this point in time and account for approximately 5%. They're the 5% of our total population that accounts for 50% of the total costs. That's the patient population that comes into focus as our communities and as our health systems have been pursuing the triple aim. And with those communities and with those health systems, IHI for years now has been developing models, working on spreading effective practice to achieve better care for this necessary population. So when the Five Foundation Collaborative came to us a year and a half ago and said, we would like to put out a compendium of resources, really a curated web-based platform with all of the best available knowledge on what it takes to improve care for complex patients. This was a natural fit for IHI. This was something that we were excited about doing and that we welcomed the opportunity to do. So with that word of introduction, I'm going to turn now to Catherine Mather, my colleague and partner in crime here. And we're also accompanied by Marian Johnson, who's been working together with us. Catherine, over to you first to take us through how the rationale for doing this work came to be, specifically for the Five Foundations, and then some of the initial efforts that we've taken on. Catherine, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Kedar, and hello, everyone. It's great to be with you here today. So as Kedar and Dr. Feather both mentioned, the playbook is funded by a Five Foundation collaborative, including the Commonwealth Fund, the John A. Hartford Foundation, the Peterson Center on Healthcare, the SCAN Foundation, and RWJF. And it was born out of this idea that these foundations, recognizing that they were all funding work in this area of improving care for people with complex needs. However, they believe that by doing this, by coming together in closer collaboration between their organizations, would be a means to accelerate system transformation for this population whose needs were not being met in the current fragmented system. So as an initial step, and well, I guess first what you'll see up on the screen is a screenshot from a perspective piece in the New England Journal of Medicine that really put this call to action out there and identified this as an urgent priority for the field. As an initial step in the 5F collaborative, they partnered with us at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement to create the playbook, which you heard a bit about, but is really a dynamic online resource and a compendium of the best available information that is out there in the field of complex health and social needs. This really just represents one tangible step taken by this group, by the 5F, the Funders Collaborative, recognizing that our current system is fragmented and burdens people with complex care at a disproportionate amount. Kedar spoke briefly about the vision and aim for the playbook, so I won't spend much time on this slide. But just to reiterate that what the playbook aims to do is to provide users with the best available knowledge that's out there about promising approaches for improving care for people with complex needs, and to do so in a format that is engaging, attractive, highly curated, practical, and usable. And our goal with the playbook is to encourage users of the playbook to start to test, adopt, implement, and spread some of the change ideas that they'll learn about on the playbook in their own care settings. So just a little bit about the playbook, kind of by the numbers. We launched just about a year ago on December 9th, 2016. And when we initially launched, we featured about 80 resources. This body of work was primarily funded by the 5 foundations. And as part of our development process for the initial launch, the IHI team reviewed, analyzed, tagged, and did some evaluation of all of the resources and identified 4 key questions that we felt are facing health system leaders, payers, and policymakers who are looking to improve care for people with complex needs. And you can see these questions here. Throughout 2017, we've been building on the body of research and now have up to 140 over 140 highly curated resources on the playbook. We also have added some meta content and new content features, including a blog that features original content to the playbook. So we have some of the experts in the field sharing their thoughts and perspective, as well as some more practical resources that we call practical plays. We'll be telling you about them a little bit more throughout the time today. And we also did some enhancements to the technology features on the playbook as well throughout the year. So here's a screenshot of the landing page, and you can see we've got the 4 key questions featured prominently, and is a main way that users can go about entering the playbook and finding the information that they're looking for. Finally, just a quick note about some of the vital statistics of the playbook, and this is as of last week, we pulled this data. But since the launch, we've had nearly 270,000 unique visitors. And you can see the page views as well. That's generally been a good mix of new users as well as returning visitors as well. On average, we have about a 45% return visit rate. I think that the analytic that we find most exciting is shared here in the 3rd bullet. It's that the users that do visit the playbook are highly engaged. We're seeing that about 50% of users who do make it to a resource page click on a link out to the original resource. So that suggests that they're finding the information that they're looking for and they're able to get to it. We're also seeing that users spend an average of 4.5 minutes per visit. This goes down a little bit as we get new users, but returning users spend more time as well. So we're really happy with that. In the world of web analytics, that's actually a very impressive amount of time. So it's just a quick overview. What we'd like to spend most of our time today is sharing with you all some of the lessons that we've learned and the priorities that we've identified for the field to consider moving forward. And I'm going to hand it over to Marion Brill-Johnston to get us started on this section. So take it away, Marion.
Thanks, Catherine. This is Marion, as Catherine mentioned, and I'm happy to be here with all of you today. And as Catherine was mentioning, when we were thinking about what would be most important to share with you all today, we realized that in curating this body of 140 some resources and in the process of working with a network of experts around the country to design the playbook over the past year, we really had the vantage point to see some of the current gaps in the field, almost sort of an informal gap analysis, where we can see what playbook users are asking for more of, where we think that future funding could be very impactful in this field to continue to improve care for these complex populations. So first of all, making the case for value-based care. And it probably doesn't surprise any of you that there is a real lack of evidence to support the business case. So since one of the main objectives of the playbook was to encourage more health systems to continue along their journey of delivery system transformation towards delivering more value-based care, one of the reasons is, why should I invest in redesigning care for these people? And a big part of that is the business case. And really the field is wide open for this gap to be filled. We do have some good resources, but usually they specifically focus on kind of one segment of the healthcare system where, by definition, comprehensive care accrues costs and savings across the entire healthcare continuum and also many sectors of society. It's always this challenge: do we take a societal perspective or do we take a health system perspective? And it's interesting that in speaking with health systems or, in certain cases, payer populations, so Medicare Advantage plans or sort of Medicaid HMOs, many of them mentioned that they have done this type of analysis. So they have some robust predictive analytics and cost savings data, but they're really contained within their own system. So they're kind of homegrown systems or they're vendor-based third-party data systems. And so we've asked them, would you be willing to share this in an open source format? And sometimes they'll say that it's proprietary, but other times they'll say that no, they would be willing to share it, but they just don't really have the impetus to write this information up and share it in a case study or a peer-reviewed format. People who are sort of going about their business of redesigning care in the world don't always have kind of the academic or grantsmanship perspective that you or I might take. So it may just be as easy as sort of funding a Medicaid HMO to write up the dollars and cents business case that it seems like Playbook users are really clamoring for. So that is one thing that we've really noticed in doing this work. And as I mentioned, we have put the best resources that we could find of pursuing financial sustainability or ROI calculators that we could find on the Playbook as resources, but we would say that this is a pretty large gap to be filled. And then, the second part of making the case for value-based care is the humanitarian standpoint. And I think that this was mentioned in the New England Journal article that there was a screenshot of that the 5 CEOs of the foundations kind of put out in their call to action, but we don't get the sense from speaking with experts or thinking about the resources and the cogent argument that's kind of woven through these resources that the humanitarian argument has been made as strongly as it could have. And so just thinking about this population of individuals, while they are heterogeneous, they are kind of bound by the fact that the system is failing them and that this is a system that is not necessarily designed to meet their needs. And when we take that very personally and hold it very deeply, then while we also need the business case to change behavior and change care, it becomes almost enough just to say we need to meet the needs of these most vulnerable in our society among us, regardless of payment changes or without waiting for sort of, the one foot in the boat and the one foot in the dock of payment reform. And so we feel like we have, sometimes that case is made, in the introduction or in the conclusion of some of these resources, but looking for kind of an 8 times 8 ways opinion of society to change around the humanitarian case for caring for individuals with complex needs is something that could be a very strong addition to the field. And so then sort of, I guess if you think about what I just spoke about is sort of the why invest in this care. And then the other gap that we found is the evidence for the what. So there are many different care models out there, some focusing on different populations or focusing on different settings of care. But what we're really missing in this field is what you would call the gold standard of evidence. So the double-blind RCT that many wait for when thinking about whether to invest in new forms of care. And interestingly, so the Camden Coalition is working on a randomized controlled trial right now for a care management program, and they are almost the exception that proves the rule, because it's interesting when you talk about the gold standard of evidence, their forthcoming research is what the entire field seems to be holding its breath and waiting for, which is not necessarily a great sign when we want to, change the tide more quickly than possibly the gold standard of evidence can keep up with. And I think that there is good evidence around specific elements of care, so readmissions or palliative care, peer-reviewed pre-post studies, but I would say that the best that we have for the playbook right now are these really granular, detailed case studies of kind of single settings of care or single care models. And if the field were to sort of invest in funding any care models that have been replicated in multiple settings or across patient populations, or really narrowing down on which elements work for which patient populations, that would definitely be a game changer for the field, and what we've seen from what playbook users have been asking for in the comments, in any webinars that we've had, and any kind of dissemination and learning efforts that we have done so far. So that is what I would say about two major lessons for the field. And then, as you can see, we'll talk about the plays, which is kind of the infographic on the right-hand side of the screen that you see, but the examples of the best kind of what's working that we have are a lot of these case studies about, say, CareMore or Hennepin Health, Guided Care, PACE, and those are wonderful. They're not randomized controlled trials. They will incite certain individuals to act, and others will sort of, laggards will wait for the more of the academic body of work, but that is a little bit of the tension that we are currently seeing in the resources that are on the playbook. I'll pass back off to you, Catherine. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks so much, Marion. And, you know, in response to what Marion was talking about, when we were initially working with the 5 foundations to come up with our strategy for the playbook, we did explore whether we would want to consider including resources specifically for individuals with complex needs and their family and caregivers to kind of navigate the system of complex care. And we did make the intentional choice to limit the audience for this site to health system leaders, payers, and policymakers. However, that should not take away from the fact that it is critical to promote authentic patient and caregiver engagement in the work in the field of complex care in order to move the field forward. So we've been working to ensure that there are adequate resources for leaders to better incorporate these perspectives of patients and caregivers in their care redesign and system transformation work. And this is this is important for so many reasons related to the humanitarian case, but also that evidence is increasingly emerging that demonstrates the benefit of patient activation and self-efficacy when it comes to improving their health. So what we've been doing is we did identify this as a significant gap in the resources that were originally included on the playbook. So we've been spending our time in 2017 scanning and reviewing with a specific eye for resources that help to fill these gaps. You see an example of one of them up on the screen now, and there's many others as well. However, we've also been working on some original content to the playbook as well. So IHI, outside of our work on the playbook, has been doing some work on understanding the family caregiver role in care delivery, specifically for people with complex needs and older adults. We've been working with Jennifer Wolf pretty closely on that in one of our virtual expeditions. And we have a blog post coming up. It should be posted next week that features an interview with Jennifer Wolf talking about just this and just how engaging caregivers can be one tool or strategy an organization would use to improve care and lower costs for this population. That said, there really remains a great opportunity for health systems and model developers to co-design care delivery with patients and caregivers. And I think that this expanded contribution and presence of patients in a really authentic way would do great service to move the field forward. I was recently at the National Center for Complex Care's annual meeting, and I imagine a number of you on the phone were as well. I thought there were some great examples there of people with lived experience engaging in this work and some good case examples of how this has helped move this forward. So I do think that other organizations could benefit from some of the guidance and mentorship from organizations that have done this well. And now I'm going to hand it back over to Kedar to talk about our last lesson learned and also lead us into the Q&A. So Kedar, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. So as you can probably imagine, a web resource like the Playbook provides, even as well as curated and as well composed as it might be, is what it is. It's a knowledge repository. It's a set of resources that can help guide the field. It's the best assembled compendium of resources that are available today to help organizations and individuals tackle the challenge of improving care for complex patients. But it is just that. It's a knowledge repository. And so to move from that notion of a knowledge base to action requires support for those that are actually trying to deliver better care for complex patients. And to do that, we can do some things with the Playbook itself, which is what you see here on the screen for those of you that are on it, are some of the ways in which we've used the play-by-play blog that Catherine mentioned earlier. We've actually put some experts like Dr. Jose Figueroa here on the left and Dr. Christine Vogeli here on the right, who are essentially teaching or helping people understand different strategies to understanding the population of high-need, high-cost patients. And this is these are specific approaches to segmentation of the population and so on. These are practical ideas for how to take action, if you will, to move from knowledge to activity going forward. But there's more that can be done here. And on the following slide that'll come up here in just a moment, you'll see what we've, Catherine, go ahead and move to the next slide. You can see the next thing that we tried to do to help, again, bridge the gap from knowledge to action, which is to create what we called a set of plays. This is, of course, a playbook. Every playbook has a set of key plays that help a team get to its goal. And so in the field of complex care, there are a set of plays that organizations, delivery systems, policymakers, payers, et cetera, need to take in order to help deliver more effective, higher quality care to individuals with complex needs. And so we've, at present, we have about a dozen plays on the Playbook that are sort of some of the key steps that folks need to take in order to effect better care. And over the next several months, we'll be adding more plays to the Playbook, so that organizations that are interested in trying to provide better service to individuals with complex needs can pick from the plays that are available that others have undertaken to help them design their care model for people with complex needs. In addition, the idea that we have for the future is that organizations can bring together a collection of plays to design a caregiving program, to design a more effective approach, and also it will require multiple plays likely strung together, just as you might imagine a football team would require multiple plays to get to the goal line. The same would be true here with organizations pursuing complex care for complex individual patients. And then the next slide will show another thing that we're working on here now to help organize the field of complex care as it matures and grows. So with the National Center for Complex Health and Social Needs, which Catherine mentioned a moment ago, the meeting last week, along with the Center for Healthcare Strategies, IHI has partnered with these two organizations to help pull the field of complex care together and design what we're calling a blueprint for complex care. The notion here is to really establish a field of practice like we have for palliative care or geriatric care. To establish the field of complex care, we felt required an organizing framework, what we call the blueprint for complex care, for which the Playbook would be a key knowledge feature or knowledge product, but again, would not be the only product going forward. So the blueprint is coming soon. We're working with a number of organizations, including the two that I mentioned earlier, to help design the blueprint, but there'll be a vast array of organizations with interests in pulling this field of complex care together that will be contributing to this blueprint going forward. And then the final comment I would make is that ultimately what's really necessary here is the kind of knowledge and action learning communities and technical assistance efforts that we think will help, again, move from a set of very good, better practice ideas to action. And at this time, there's a number of efforts going on right now to try to create those opportunities for bringing organizations together to learn from one another about what it takes to provide better care for complex needs patients, and then to put some of the ideas that are on the blueprint or on the playbook into action. And so that is something that's being conceptualized right now by the 5 foundations and several others, I'd say, outside of the 5 foundations, that are starting to think about what it will take to put together a learning community of accountable care organizations or Medicare Advantage plans or special needs programs. How do we create those kinds of alliances and collaboratives that will allow for the formal sort of translation of better ideas that are hosted on the playbook into actual practice at the scale that the 5 foundations are seeking. So with that, we're going to just stop here and say those are the opportunities that we saw for you all as a collection, as a community of funders and grant makers, making the case for value-based care, building more evidence for effective care models, as we talked about a moment ago, really building and promoting authentic patient and caregiver engagement, and then finally providing that support for implementers to really help us move from knowledge contained in a playbook to action. So with that, we'll stop and look forward to hearing your questions and comments at this point in time.
Well, thank you so much for our 3 speakers. Really a very informative presentation, and we have a fair number of questions already, but I invite you now to open the question panel on your control panel that you see at the right of your screen, and type in your questions, and I will start asking our panelists at this point. So the first one has to do with our funder audience, and the question is, the person sending in the question says, I'm from a smaller local foundation. Are these mainly models that are applicable for large-scale implementation, or how would we use this information in a much smaller environment? And I'll let anyone take a shot at that one.
Hi, this is Marian Johnson. I think if you're referring to the resources that are contained on the playbook, while it's true that many of the case studies are written about the more well-known kind of leading exemplar institutions or healthcare delivery systems, I would actually say that the playbook itself is not really directed at the leading edge. It's more for organizations that are just starting or sort of earlier in their journey towards improving value-based care for individuals with complex needs, to learn from the repository of what health systems who have been maybe doing this for 10 or 20 or 30 years have written up and are sharing in an open source format with the rest of the country. That said, since that can kind of go both ways, because sometimes hearing again and again about the Geisingers and the Intermountain and the Kaisers can be a turnoff for smaller organizations who really want granular information from peer type organizations. And I think that that's a really good point, that funding a smaller organization with maybe less resources and less homegrown systems, and with only enough resources to focus on kind of one microsystem of change at this point in time, would be very, very valuable peer information for the types of visitors and users to the playbook. So I'm not sure if that answers the questions. Is kind of, yes, this is a resource for smaller organizations or organizations that are earlier in their journey, and also we need to have more resources in which they can recognize themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And
I would just, Catherine.
Oh, go ahead, Catherine.
Sorry. I was just going to add that I agree completely with what Marian just shared. And, that is something that we've been trying to balance, sharing the homegrown models from some of the names that are becoming quite recognizable in the field. But we have heard from our advisory group and from users of the playbook that there is a desire for case examples from other types of organizations. So within the next, we didn't have a chance to talk about this in our presentation, but within the next month, we'll be launching a platform where users of the playbook can actually share kind of case examples, I guess, of the work that they're doing in the hope that this will help to create that network of different types of users. So that's something that should be coming out soon in terms of technical capacity, and we'll be rolling out kind of a call for case examples as well.
And let me just add one additional comment. This is Kedar. The plays, which we showed you one or two screenshots of the plays, they are definitely aimed at at not an advanced practice kind of environment. We may, in due course, have layers of plays where there's, the 101 plays, the 201 plays, 301 plays, et cetera, where there's sort of a gradation there that might come. But at the moment, we started with the basics. We started with the fundamentals of what it takes to reorganize care for complex patients. And so really any organization that seeks to improve care for individuals with complex needs could be helped by applying one or more of the plays that we've put onto the playbook. Back to you, John, if you can hear me.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had put myself on mute, and I've only done about 1,000 of these, and I forgot myself to take myself off of mute. So the follow-up question is this: it's quite appropriate and very worthwhile for the playbook to be oriented towards people that actually are implementing systems of care, because that's the audience that you're trying to reach. Is there a specific way in which funders might use this same information to make judgments about which kinds of programs they might want to fund in the future? So a slightly different angle to this than the question around smaller programs, but for smaller funders, is there a particular way that they would find this information most useful?
Yeah, that's a good question. Absolutely, as the questioner suggested, the playbook is aimed at the audience that is trying to deliver care or trying to pay for care. The way that I could imagine, I mean, in the notion of it is aimed at least in part towards payers as well, and I know that's different than funders. But one of the reasons that we built it that way is because we wanted funders to fund and payers to pay for care that is effective. So one way to think about the playbook is it's also a way of guiding funding decisions. Again, if you're a payer, it's paying for care delivery. If you're a funder, or a philanthropist, it may be guiding decisions about where to invest your resources in terms of delivering or sorry, not delivering, but creating new models of practice, or where you think the promising practices are at this point in time. And so the one, as a funder, you may read particularly around the effective care models in that particular section of the playbook, or effective practices. Those would be the places where you would find the practice models that have been proven to be more successful. And I think funding the expansion, scale up, application to new environments of those effective models would be an effective way of using the playbook as a funder to determine funding priorities going forward.
Well, thank you for that one. To switch topics a little bit, there have been over 100 Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, Innovation Awards. Can these projects be turned into valuable information on the impact of different models? The evidence so far is really only about cost, not really about quality directly, but there still might be some aspects that are valuable, and asking for your comment on that.
Well, I mean, I guess I'll start on this one, and then Marion and Catherine, feel free to jump in. The practice models, I guess I would quibble a little bit with the comment that there's no impact on quality or outcomes, because in many cases the CMMI innovation grants have had an impact both on cost and on quality outcomes. I'm thinking about a couple specifically that we've been connected to or involved with that do have some impact on cost and quality together. Certainly, some of those models, some of those ideas, do focus on complex needs individuals, and to the extent that they've been proven or have started to show benefit, they would potentially appear as models on the playbook in the future. I don't know at this point in time, and Marion and Catherine, feel free to come in here and speak to this point, but how many of the existing resources on the playbook were originally funded by CMMI awards at this point in time? I think some of them have been, but not many at this point in time. But Marion and Catherine, come in here as well.
Yeah, no, I think I do not think we've done that analysis, and in fact, I think that that's an interesting provocation for us when we think about the payment and policy model section of the playbook, to really build out the funding models that have generated the best case examples and studies that we've seen. I would just say that unfortunately we are limited by what has been written up. So the playbook right now is a repository, and we sort of link to source documents. And if there is something that has been written up about one of the communities that received a CMMI Innovation Award, then of course we include it if it's robust and is helpful to the field. But as we are not currently on the playbook in the business, so to speak, of creating much original content, we as the IHI team, in conjunction with the funders, would put possibly some of those models that haven't been written up as a gap analysis that could be funded for being written up in the future, but we would be constrained by where there is a source document about any given model. Catherine, would you add anything?
No, I don't think so. I think that you captured that there, right?
It is a good provocation. I mean, it's something that we could do. One of the things that we do is produce these sort of summaries and what we call meta content. These are not, it's not the original, paper or original resource, but it's sort of a analysis of multiple resources kind of together. And I could imagine a paper, a short paper, I'll post it onto the playbook site that summarizes some of the most important models that CMMI has funded as it relates to this population of complex patients, and just say, give a status update. Where are they with their results? How many of them have published, both quality outcome results as well as cost results? So that's a very conceivable thing that we could do on the playbook. So thank you for the idea.
Another thing, question.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Kater just reminded me of one idea that we had been toying with for an additional section on the playbook in the future, is kind of a where are they now update, because oftentimes you hear about these models that have some evidence really at one point in time, and it's hard to understand now 5 or 7 years after kind of their Vanguard Health Affairs paper was published, whether the champion has left the organization, if they've kind of expanded their great model to their entire region, or whether their funding dried up and you never heard from them again. And so I think that is another provocation for the field that would be very, interesting to follow up on. And I think a lot of the CMMI models would fall into that bucket of where are they now, what are they doing, and could we have a little original content, meta content update on some of those models. Thanks, that's all.
Okay, great. This is a question that may lead us to some clarification of the scope of the playbook, but the question is there also attention being given by IHA and others to innovative models in the care of children or youth who have complex care needs? So I guess one of the underlying issues is, because this is a Grantmakers in Aging webinar, there may be a sense that this is about complex care for older people, but that's actually not the case. So could you describe sort of the range of types of systems that you're talking about here?
Yeah, we actually, so this is a good question. Purposely, in this iteration of the playbook, we did make a decision with the funders to not focus on pediatric complexity because it does lead in a slightly different direction, and it's also where the funders' priorities were. I mean, the priorities of as you know, some of those foundations are very familiar. Probably all of them are very familiar to folks on the line, and their priorities were very much in the territory of older adults, as we mentioned a minute ago, as well as those that are adults with complex needs. So based on those priorities and the interests of the group, we focused on adult priorities in this first iteration and did not include pediatric complexity at this point in time. There is a discussion about including pediatrics in the future, but we haven't yet crossed that bridge at this point in time.
All right, thank you. Here's a question about whether or not there are specific models that are more applicable to the complex care in rural areas. So are you finding evidence-based models that are applicable in rural areas, and what kind of models would those be?
So this is Marion. The best example that comes to mind currently is the case study on Project Echo, so which is pretty recently published, which is essentially kind of a model of educating rural, more generalist physicians on aspects of care for complex health needs. It started in New Mexico, where it was difficult for all residents of New Mexico who needed complex care for hepatitis C to travel to a specialist who was well-versed in the latest care. And so this kind of telehealth model, but not telehealth for the patients, telehealth for physicians themselves, and that network has been an interesting model that has spread to many different conditions, many different regions. I'm sure everyone on the call is familiar with Dr. Sanjeev Arora and what he's managed to do. I would say we have not stratified the resources by the setting of care or the sort of type of community. And that's simply just because we haven't found the resources to be robust enough in that area. We really have struggled with the curation elements, and we have settled on these kind of four questions, and then the sub-questions beneath them, and these patient populations following along with the National Academy of Medicine report, simply because this is the first iteration. This is the best we have. And sort of going back to the last question about pediatric complex care, we've been thinking a lot about this topic, not just because it would be important to include best practice care models for the care of children, but also because some of the best models and processes we see are in the care of children with complex needs that could then be sort of reverse innovated to an adult or an older adult population. And that all of these are wonderful ideas that I think in kind of the next generation of this field, we hope to see in a much more robust format. Catherine or Kedar, if you want to add anything.
Well, let me ask you then a follow-up. Let me ask you then a follow-up question to that. Given that you have, looked at the field broadly here, are you thinking about turning this analysis and framework into a research agenda? So trying to push it the other direction, so you tell the field what specific things are missing and what areas of research need to be done.
It's interesting. We are doing, this is the 5 foundations that sponsored the playbook have in fact made exactly that request of us and of the advisory group. So we have a very dynamic 20-member advisory group now of leaders in the field, and we have, we do a gap analysis of the field kind of routinely now on a regular basis. Every 6 to 8 months, we sort of look at what's on the playbook, what our scanning of the literature, as well as our both peer-reviewed and the gray literature have revealed, and that allows us to compose essentially a gap analysis, which could be turned essentially into a funding priority list. And in some senses, that's, I think, how we'd have to have the 5 foundations on the line here to answer the question of exactly how they're using that gap analysis. But one provocation they've offered us is, as we have given them that gap analysis, is can or should we be using this to help inform our funding decisions kind of prospectively? And so I think that is that is absolutely, I think, a way in which you could think about how we're using the playbook in our work trying to create the playbook as we scan the field and understand where there's progress and where there's opportunity for improvement. It certainly gives us an opportunity to study those gaps, and some of those will make sense for potential funding in the future.
I think we have time for one more question, and this is maybe a little bit provocative question. Do you see this project and the work that you do at the Institute aiming towards a specific type of model eventually? Or is this always going to be providing information and about systems and models for complex care? So the specific question that the person asked are you seeing this as driving towards a single payer model or some other specific model of payment and care?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know that we believe that there is look, I don't know that we're using the playbook as a vehicle to drive towards a sort of a single policy recommendation that we believe will take us to a different place in the future. There's certainly not the playbook alone. I mean, I think there's a wide array of activities that IHI is pursuing that seek the triple aim. Again, so going back to what I led off with here in the beginning of the conversation, and that getting to the triple aim, better health, better experience, lower cost, likely involves a set of payment arrangements and delivery arrangements that will start to mirror, I think, a more organized delivery system with likely fewer of the kind of administrative waste that we currently see in the present system. So I don't think, I wouldn't say that the playbook itself argues for any particular policy, universal policy suggestion like single payer or otherwise, but it certainly argues for specific policy decisions that would lead to better outcomes for the segment of the population that the playbook is concerned with. So that's the way that I would think of it at this point in time.
Well, thank you for all of your questions and comments. At this point, I'm going to turn to our speakers one last time for their final words of wisdom to the audience. And Marion, let's start with you.
Oh, thank you. So we've talked about so many priorities and kind of wisdom for the field that we are able to offer already. But I guess I would just offer on parting a little bit of tactical advice. Just based on what we've learned in the playbook, I would encourage grantors, grantees, or even just people who are doing this hard work out in the world to take a really layered approach to their learning and dissemination strategy. So what I mean is, yes, go ahead and produce kind of the 200-page technical report or policy report based on all the work that you've done. But what we've seen is that playbook users are really clamoring for, and we know this because we see how they behave on the site, where they click and how long they spend on each page. What they really, really are driven towards is this quote unquote snackable content. And even though that word kind of triggers all kinds of things for me, I feel like the blogs, the short videos, infographics, kind of office hours with experts, the podcasts of like how I built this type of resource. That seems to be what's really, really resonating with the field right now. And, you know, short of being able to produce an RCT, which nobody can just snap their fingers and do tomorrow, but you can create this kind of original or meta content that really gives people who are doing this work out in the field access to those experts and access to peer communities in a very you know, tangible way. So that would be my advice for people on this call.
Thanks very much. Catherine?
Sure, thanks. You know, I'd echo everything that Marian said, and maybe just add to it a bit. You know, I think that there is this real desire in the field to get some additional guidance and mentorship into making changes in their care management systems and delivery models. Specifically, and I'm thinking back to the participant who asked the question about, you know, smaller organizations. I think specifically there. So it's really what I see for the field is a balancing act of moving toward more of that gold standard research that Marian referenced earlier, but also developing mechanisms for organizations, you know, to just get started and maybe do the one or two things they can do right now to start to improve care.
Kedar?
Great. Well, once again, thank you for having us on. We just really welcome the opportunity to be with you. This really is among the chief problems of our time in healthcare. I mean, this, you know, addressing complexity. This is, of course, grantmakers in aging. So you guys are working on one of the most important of those segments of the population that have complex needs. There are others, but addressing complexity and figuring out how to deliver better practice, better care to that 5 to 10% of the population that does that experiences the ill health, the poor experience, and the high costs of our systems. This is where our systems fail our people, and I think this is the opportunity for us at this point in time. The playbook is great. It's knowledge. It's a place to turn for ideas when you've run out of ideas. But we've got to move from ideas to action. And so my plea to the community here gathered would be that you consider funding or consider moving dollars towards not just producing knowledge products, but also enabling organizations and individuals to take that knowledge and translate it into action. And if you do fund people who are working on these issues, send them to the playbook to learn, but expect them also to contribute the playbook so we can all learn how to advance this field of complex care. So thanks for having us on.
I want to thank Dr. Kedar Mehta, Catherine Mather, and Marian Burrell Johnson, all from the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, for their expertise and wisdom for us today. We thank you for all that you do to make life better for older adults and people of all ages. I also want to thank the 5 Funder Collaborative that consists of the Commonwealth Fund, the John A. Hartford Foundation, Peterson Center on Healthcare, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and the SCAN Foundation for their important support of this work. I also want to acknowledge and thank the support of Grantmakers in Health, which is our co-sponsor for today's webinar. We are making this presentation available to anyone who wishes to view it later, including both the slides and the audio. Watch for a rebroadcast link on our website or contact us at Grantmakers in Aging. And please join us for a very special upcoming webinar, our last one of the year, on December the 1st at 2 p.m., which is our regular time. We will be joined by the Administration for Community Living Administrator and HHS Assistant Secretary on Aging, Lance Robertson. This will be one of the very first national opportunities that Secretary Robinson has had in the 3 months he's been on the job to talk to the aging audience. So I think this is an important webinar. You will find more information about this and all of our webinars at our website, giaging.org. And finally, thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. Have a great day.